Hello, and welcome back to AP Human Geography. Today we're going to have the second part of our conversation about the world religions, and we are going to focus on Eastern religions today, and we talked a great deal in class about what that meant, and then we're going to start with the oldest of the five world religions. It's the third largest, and that is Hinduism. It is ethnic, and unlike the Abrahamic religions that we talked about in the other conversation, it is polytheistic. There may in fact be thousands, hundreds of thousands of manifestations of this one supreme reality. So there are lots of different gods and goddesses. It is really one of the religions that is still practiced in its hearth, and that is India predominantly. Its sacred site is the Ganges River, and it's heavily associated and drives the caste system of India. And if you have any questions about the caste system, please ask me in class because we can talk about this more if you want to. It has four basic pillars, right? I always mispronounce this, but the Purusharthas, and you can see here that's Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, right? And again, I always mispronounce about half of these, so please forgive me if I have done that. Again, we're talking about India, and you can see that the majority of India is Hindu, and you'll notice that there's this little kind of tiny group here that are the Sikh, and we will talk about that in just a second. Hindu architecture, we have temples, right? And we've talked about temples before. There are Greek temples, there are Roman temples. We talked about Jewish temples, which are actually synagogues. And here we have Hindu temples. There are really two types of Hindu temples, and they are the Nagara and the Dravida. Both of them are towers, right? Both of them are towers, and that is really the kind of shape that you're going to be looking for when you're looking at Hindu architecture. It is these triangular pyramid style with boxes set on top of each other, or so it can either be triangular or it can be kind of that arch, that beehive shape. And you can see the beehive very clearly here at Angkor Wat, which is a huge complex, and we will talk about Angkor Wat more when we talk about solstices. Okay, so let's talk about Buddhism. Buddhism comes in several forms. First, it is universalizing. The basic beliefs include reincarnation, although this is different than it is in Hinduism. We're looking for gaining enlightenment. There are the Four Noble Truths, which, four is a big number. We'll talk about that later on. We've talked about it a little bit. It has an actual founder that we can track back directly to. Unlike in some cases the other religions, there are older pieces. Here we have an actual founder. And so it can be polytheistic or it can be atheistic as just a belief system. Your first mini quiz question relates here. Suffering is due to wrongly desiring the things of this world. This is one of the tenets of... This is a tenet of Buddhism, right? And so when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, here they are, and they really do center around the idea of suffering. And the way to enlightenment is the Eightfold Path, and here is the Eightfold Path. And you, of course, can read all of these. You will read these later. But here's the thing. This goes to the idea of it being a philosophy, right, as well as a religion. And for some people, it is only a philosophy, like a guiding instruction manual for life, if you will, right? Okay, and again, that's not true for everybody, but for some people it is. It's the one that has that more, and is more able to be that way than the others. Yeah. So among the important differences between Hinduism and the teachings of the Buddha, and there are a lot of similarities, right? One of the differences is all of the following except the Buddha denied the existence of God or gods, Buddha rejected the caste system, the Buddha denied the authority of the Hindu priests, or the Buddha did not accept the Hindu belief in rebirth. Which one of these is not true? And by not too true, I mean which one of these is a difference except, right? And it's about rebirth. Both Hinduism and Buddhism believe in rebirth or reincarnation. So the answer to this is number 4. All right, and when we look at Buddhism, we know that it begins in India. Having said that, though, the majority of India still practices Hinduism, and where you see a good, see the largest portion of Buddhists are going to be in East Asia, Southeast Asia, China, right, Korea, Japan, those areas. And this is an interesting thing because when you start in India, this is where you're looking at that atheistic version of Buddhism. And when you move into the East, you see this polytheistic version of Buddhism. And this is one of the religions that is practiced more outside of its hearth than inside of its hearth. And that's an important concept as well. Okay, so when we think about Buddhist architecture, we're going to see some of that similarity to the Hindu architecture. You can see this arched dome right here. But more often than not, it's going to be smaller when you're thinking of these domes. Things like stupas, right? Or stupas that you see here. Now, when you move into China and Korea and Japan, the Buddhist architecture takes on a completely different structure, and it's a structure that you will recognize, and that is the pagoda, right? And so this is the Indian version, this is the East Asian version of this small kind of layered pyramid effect, but this is different. The other thing that you're going to see, especially in East Asia, are large statues of Buddha, very common. And some among the largest are the Lishan Buddhas in China. These are carved directly into the cliff face. These are people, and so they are huge. They are amazing statues. They are amazing feats of human engineering. Okay, I do want to talk a little bit about Taoism. This is an ethnic religion. It is polytheistic. This is practiced predominantly in China. And this is where you get the yin-yang symbol. This is polytheistic, although the Tao is sort of the source of the universe. This is also where you see the feng shui that became so popular in the West. We also see in China Confucianism. This is ethnic and it is non-theistic. It is more like the original Buddhism in that way. And then here is your next question, and this is about Shinto. Shintoism, the traditional religion of Japan, holds that the sacred deities are nature spirits, and this is a derivative of Buddhism, the precursor to Confucianism, an example of animism, or the opposite of Hinduism. This is an example of animism. Shinto is one of the animistic religions that we'll talk about. It is also ethnic, and really we're focusing on nature spirits, and these are the kami. And so we're looking at one of the religions, and it's an indigenous religion, but one of the religions that's rooted in an understanding of nature. And here you can see when we look at Central and East Asia, this is a map of where all of the religions are practiced. And you can see that the majority of religions, with the exception of Buddhism, are practiced in their hearths. And you can also see here you have, this is Western, right? Western religions, and predominantly Eastern religions, looking at the continent of Asia. Some other religions of note are going to be the Chinese folk religions. This is going to vary depending on where you are in China. Jainism, this is an ethnic Indian religion. It is also animistic. It also has reincarnation. Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism all have reincarnation, although here you are lacking in a kind of defined god or set of spirits. We also have shamanism, and shamanism is really kind of that idea of a person who is a mediator between the divine and people. And there are shamans all over the world, and so it really kind of depends on where you are. A lot of shamanism goes with tribal religions, and so you'll find tribal or folk religions all over the world. But when we talk about tribal religions, we're going to see this predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, which is going to become a part of our conversation about syncretic religions. And this is where you have religions combining together to form new religions. And Sikhism, and remember I pointed this out earlier, is the first syncretic religion we're going to talk about. It is an amalgam of Hinduism and Islam. It is ethnic and monotheistic. You have God, who is the deity, but then you also have the importance of doing good actions. All people are equal. The all people are equal is a step away from the caste system, but you have some of the other components that are part of Hinduism. And here are the main Sikh beliefs, and then which you can look at later. And here's the Sikh population. Again, we still have the Hearth is still very, very heavily populated by the Sikh population. And interestingly enough, you can see it's right here on that border between Islam and Hinduism. And so it's a natural amalgam of those. Now, you also have the African diasporic religions. These are ethnic and animistic, and these are the big three. You have probably heard of at least two of them, probably Voodoo and Santeria, but there's also Candomblé. Voodoo is Caribbean. It is Yoruba, which is an African folk religion, and Catholicism. Voodoo is not syncretic. When you're talking about West African Voodoo, you are actually talking about an set religion in sub-Saharan Africa. Candomblé is Yoruba, Fon, Bantu, and Catholicism. Santeria out of Cuba is going to be Native American, Yoruba, and also Catholic. And you'll notice that all of these are folk religions mixed with Catholicism. And one of the big deals about all of these is that there are spirit possessions, and so you have these Loas that are these spirits. So it's animistic and slightly polytheistic, although there is a god, but his representations are these intermediaries, these spirits. And so it's a little bit more complicated than just being monotheistic or polytheistic, which is where we get the animistic idea. They're spirits here on the earth. And when we look at the spread of African religions into other religions, you can see that it follows the slave trades. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sacred architecture. We've talked a lot about the idea that huge buildings are built, these churches and synagogues and temples and mosques are all built to the divine, and they are the biggest buildings on the landscape. They are the most dramatic, the most significant, and oftentimes the most exotic, whether it is from the materials themselves or it's the effort that's put into it, the carvings, the art, the windows, whatever it happens to be. They're a big, big deal. But interestingly enough, as time goes on and we start forming larger civilizations and people start having larger or more ideas and more people start coming together and seeing that there are differences, we have some interesting shifts. And when you look at buildings today, one of the questions we should ask ourselves is, what do we find important? What dominates our life? And what do we view in that godlike seat? And is that what we actually want? And that's a question for you to ask. But if you look at government buildings, they're pretty sacred looking. And that's an interesting statement about what we think. Yeah, and then when we start looking at buildings that dominate the landscape, in modern times, it's downtown, right? Buildings to the god of money, finance. Also a very interesting statement about where we are and what we value. All right, so that is it for this one. I will see you next time, and thanks for listening. Please make sure to ask any questions in class when I see you.